Well, I couldn't put either of these two books down, so we're doing a review for both of these books all in one go. Mad Ship and Ship of Destiny are books 2 and 3 of the Liveship Traders trilogy, and it's the second trilogy in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings series. I just finished Ship of Destiny this morning, and I've got a lot of thoughts on the trilogy, and I want to talk about it. If you see my review for Ship of Magic, you'll know that I think that book is one of the best books I've ever read, and I will extend that sentiment to the entire trilogy. However, I think I was a little naive in my review of book one because there was a lot of heavy stuff in book one. I labeled it as more of a drama about grief and tragedy than it was any kind of adventure action book, and that's totally fair. But one of the things that drew me into Ship of Magic was, despite all of that, there was still an adventure, a sense of adventure and whimsy in many ways. The live ships were just really cool, and I felt there was like a whimsical nature to them almost, and how interesting they were, and how alien and out, like such a weird idea. And I wasn't expecting the direction that that the trilogy took, because while the first book had this balance of fun and seriousness to it, the rest of the series dips well into heaviness and tragedy and grief and trauma and abuse, and all these difficult things were there in the first book. There was a lot of fun in that first book as well, and there's not so much of that in books 2 or 3 anymore. And I think that was the right direction the series to take. I think that was where it was always heading. But it took me off guard in many ways, and I was unprepared for how dark and how serious this series really gets. And I feel kind of bad because after I read Ship of Magic, I've been telling so many people to read this trilogy, and I've been pitching it as like, oh, it's like, kind of Pirates of the Caribbean, but with sentient ships and all that. And it's way more serious and way more heavy than that by the time you get to the end of Ship of Destiny, and I almost wish there was some kind of warning for that. But despite all of that, I think that the Liveship Traders trilogy as a whole, now that I have the whole picture of it in my head, I think it is indeed the best trilogy that I have ever written. Well, the best fantasy trilogy that I've ever written. I think it's my new favorite series of all time, and I think it's going to stick with me for a long time. And I think I'm going to reread it for many years to come, because there's so much to digest and so much to chew on, and there's more than just a sense of whimsy and adventure. There's a real sense of loss and tragedy to the whole thing, and there's a bittersweetness to it, and there's some horror to it, and it's the kind of thing that gets under your skin and that you just can't stop thinking about. I don't know how to talk about this completely spoiler free, so I'm going to be talking about stuff, and I probably will just end up spoiling things. So we'll just put that warning up there, I guess. I don't know. So let's just talk about it. The second half of Ship of Destiny is one of the most disturbing, horrific, and heavy things that I've ever had to read. And for those of you who've read it, you know what I'm talking about. It has to do with one of our main characters, Kenneth, and Kenneth is a character that was fascinating in books 1 and 2, and he was fascinating in book 1, but he was very hateable. I mentioned that in my book 1 review. At the start of book 2, you almost start to think that he's going to turn around and he's going to go through some redemption arc. And then through the second half of book 2, you realize that's really not going to happen. You think that as he and Wintro bond, that Kenneth is going to turn around. He's going to be maybe positively affected by Wintro. And instead what happens is Kenneth doubles down on the manipulation and the control on both Wintro and Etta in some really gross ways, like trying to get them to hook up so he can have a baby to keep controlling Vivacia. Similarly, the way he manipulates Vivacia, gaslights her, is really disturbing. And so any hope of some kind of redemption for Kenneth was already out the water by book 2. However, the big thing that book 2 did is it made Kenneth understandable and very sympathetic, and it revealed many things about his past and the deep simmering grief and trauma that he's holding down, and you understand him, and you get what he's doing. But he doubles down on all of these things, and he doesn't start doing good things for good reasons. He is still doing good things for bad reasons, and he's still selfish and a gaslighter, a manipulator. The only and while you're more sympathetic to him, he doesn't really redeem himself at all. So I already knew that by the end of book 2. And in book 3, I think there's an event in the second half that is supposed to, I think, be a completely unsubtle way to tell the reader that there is nothing redeeming about Kenneth. It doesn't matter about his past. It doesn't matter about his trauma, his grief. And as sympathetic as he is, this scene that happens in book 3, I think is there to prove once and for all to the reader that no, this guy is a bad, evil, terrible man. And it doesn't matter how sympathetic he is. It doesn't matter how much hurt and trauma that he has. He is hurting others, and he's controlling others, and he's abusing others. And it's horrific. It is simply horrific to read. And I don't know how else to say other than it is sickening. It is absolutely sickening. And I guess that segues neatly into Paragon. Paragon, one of my favorite books from book 1. He's probably the best character in the entire trilogy, and the realization that he and Kenneth were connected, and that Kenneth used to sail on him and that Paragon was Egret's ship the whole time, was the puzzle piece that clicked the whole story in my head and completely blew me away, because I really had no idea that that was what was happening. And it made everything tie together. It made sense. It made Paragon made sense. It made Kenneth make sense. Just the whole picture was complete. And it was just so sad, because the live ships were something that I thought were really fun and whimsical in the first book. And even though I recognized that there were some interesting thematic things going on with how the first book was dealing with agency and control in your life, and how the ships aren't necessarily in control of their lives, I wasn't suspecting the reveal pretty early on at the beginning of book 2 that the ships were the memories of dead dragons. And how when you realize that, how horrific that is to think about, how horrific it is for the ships to realize it, and for many of the ships who used to be dragons to feel trapped in a body that is not their own, to long to be a dragon but knowing that they never can, to long to be alive but knowing that they're not really alive, they're just a collection of memories of dragons and humans, is really sad. And really, is just hard to think about. I had so much fun with these live ship characters in the first book, and I still love the live ship characters. I still love Paragon, I still love Vivacia, I still love Ophelia. But to recognize that what has been done to them unknowingly by these human characters is just a really hard thing to reckon with. And it's one of my favorite themes in stories, the idea that humans inadvertently messing with things that they don't understand and causing horrible things to happen because they don't take the time to understand these things. And that's how bad things can happen. And that's how you get these live ships. And that's a tough pill to swallow, that these characters that you like, that you have affection for, that they've been mistreated and so horribly. And that was another element of the fun of the first book, that while there was elements of this there, that it was fully revealed and explored in books 2 and 3, and that was kind of hard to deal with. One of the other things that is tough is just how much tragedy and grief and trauma is shown in books 2 and 3. Nothing goes well for any of these characters ever throughout the whole trilogy, and I think it's certainly part of that. And every character's ending is very bittersweet in that way. And I felt like I realized early on in really by the end of book 1, but especially the beginning of book 2, all these characters' quests are pretty much doomed to fail. And even though that some characters succeed in the goals they set out in, just the way it came about is still bittersweet. And I think a big case in point of that is Althea. I mean, that she hopes to get her life ship back, but it's not going to happen, because Vivacia changes so much, and Althea spurned her at the beginning of book 1, and there's no way that things can go back to the way they are. I think it's another very powerful theme that's explored at the end of this trilogy, almost that Lord of the Rings ending vibe, where the characters try to come back and get things back to the way they were, and they can't do it, and they're all irrevocably changed. It's true for Althea, it's true for Brashen, Malta especially, and a lot of these characters, they don't end where they want. Some good things happen, some bad things happen, and that just feels very real and very emotional and very impactful. I really think that when you look at this trilogy, I think it's a story about grief and trauma and abuse, and how that affects people. How it not just affects people, but how it affects the descendants below those people, the generations afterwards. That grief and that trauma, they cascade down and they cause other problems. But beyond that, I think the trilogy also tackles a lot of other big issues as well. I think in the third book and in the second book, you see a lot of the horrors of young people being consumed by nationalism, and how that can cause people to do terrible things. I think you can see how the theme being delved into about how trying to keep your faith in the middle of horrible times and horrible actions can create this cognitive dissonance where you can start to excuse these horrible things that are happening around you in pretty horrific ways. And that, I think that's dealt with Wintrow a lot. I think you can see a lot of, you know, classism and sexism that's being delved into in this trilogy. I mean, throughout the whole thing, but like specifically with how the tattooed are dealt with in the book. It's crazy that it has to take, you know, the interference of a dragon to be able to get the tattooed to be able to buy back their freedom, you know, and because there's all these characters that you follow are against slavery, but still, like Wintrow with the act with Kenneth, they are complacent and they allow these bad things to continue to happen. I think I watched some videos. I think it was Jake Bishop who said that a big theme of the trilogy is complacency and how these bad things are going on, and all it takes for these bad things to continue to happen are for the good people who oppose them to not do anything about it. I think that's definitely a big theme that's explored here. All of these things are very pretty dark and heavy stuff, really, to consider. The way it affects our characters this way, both on a micro and macro scale, is, you know, pretty horrific. I didn't even touch on the whole theme of memories and how that defines a person, both your good and your bad memories. Is it good to take away your bad memories, or is that a mercy? What is that? What does taking away bad or good memories do to a character? What about ancestral memories, right? Memories that you inherit from people above you, and how important that is. There's a big theme of traditionalism as well. You can see that in how Bingtown it is very traditional, and things are that tradition is being shaken up. And you might think that the end goal is to get things back to the way they were traditionally, but no, we need to form a new way, a new path forward, because the traditions that worked so well generations ago are not working well for everybody equally anymore. And what do you value? Do you value the traditions that keep you in power and in comfort, or do you sacrifice some of that in order to make sure that everybody is treated fairly, right? And I felt like these are the kind of books that make you think, and I think these are the kind of books that make you a better person, honestly, when you read them. And I mean, what more can you ask for from a book trilogy? And on top of all of that, it still continues to have some of the best pirate action scenes that you'll ever see. The action scene at the end of Ship of Destiny, the climax of the entire trilogy, is one of the most thrilling action sequences I've ever read. The character dynamics are the best you'll ever see. I mean, like, I don't have enough time to get into the details of the relationship between Wintrow and Kenneth and Etta, and how fascinating it is, how horrific it is, how hard to stomach it is. And just some of the characters here are not some of, pretty much all of them are some of the best characters you'll ever read, but that does not make them likable and it doesn't make them good. Just because a character has a POV does not mean they're justified. I immediately, after finishing Ship of Destiny, went online to watch reviews and look reviews of Goodreads, and the fact that some people are viewing Kenneth as redeemed at the end of this book is pretty shocking to me, because I think that's very clearly not what's happening. Or that Kenneth somehow gets a death like a hero, I think is also a false reading of the text. Or that Kenneth was deserving of forgiveness, which he was not deserving of forgiveness whatsoever. And the fact that people think that Robin Hobb wrote Kenneth this way or treated him this way is, I think, a pretty unfair reading of the text. That is not what we're supposed to take away from this at all, and or to take in bad faith the idea that I mean, I read this one review that talked about how the point of the series was that women should go back to traditional roles. That is clearly not the point of this story at all. And so I think some people can take Ship of Destiny in a bad way, and so you should be ready for that. That just because some characters do some things does not mean it is condoned in the text. Just because characters are reacting in realistic ways does not mean that is how they should react if they were better people. But they're real people, and I think that's the point. And people are messy, and some people are irredeemable. But even if they're irredeemable, some people might still have that cognitive dissonance in them, and they might, you know, try and excuse these irredeemable acts. And while that's horrific to read and unfair and unjust, that is what happens, you know, all the time. I think that's why this story has been so impactful for me. I think it's one of the best I've ever read. I think it's so important to read about, because you need to be confronted with these dark truths in order to be able to move on and try to strive to be better. And I think that's what the Liveship Traders has inspired in me. I think it is a perfect trilogy. I think it is amazing in every sense of the word, and I think everybody should read it.